Sacred places aren't always on foreign lands or in hard to get to places. Sometimes they are right in your home state. I'm Elise Wells, the host of Seeking Numina, the show where I take you to sacred places around the world. And although I usually live in Greece, a place filled with ancient temples and sacred places associated with gods going back thousands of years, today I'm going to tell you about a sacred place in Pennsylvania where grew up most of my time as a kid, and a special state park that I actually descended alone in the deep of winter to explore. Welcome to Seeking Numina. I'm your host, Elise Wells, and I invite you to connect with the sacred wild within and around you through Numina, or sacred sites around the world, and the wisdom they hold. Together, let's remember the old ways, build relationships with land spirits, and dare to reach out to the fairies. The sacred wild is inviting you to dance in the moonlight. Will you answer their call? So in this episode of Seeking Numina with Elise Wells, we're going to look at French Creek State Park. This is a state park that goes back to the 1880s. Up until that point, it was I think it officially closed in like 1902. There was a furnace that bought and owned the land. It's over 8,000 acres of woods and a big, beautiful lake called Hopewell Lake. And Hopewell Furnace was, for a couple hundred years, using that land and unfortunately killing those trees to use them as fuel for the furnace. And that stopped over 100 years ago. And so the forest has been allowed to regrow. And so the tiny blip of time interrupting this old growth forest, when it was harvested and sadly clear cut from its ancient virgin timber in the early 1800s during the Industrial Revolution, by the end of that century, the forest was allowed to reclaim itself. And so French Creek State Park, when it was acquired in the beginning of the 20th century by the US government as a state park, has been allowed to flourish ever since. And so I don't want to focus on the fact that the virgin timber was destroyed because that's sad. What I do want to focus on is that for the land, time is so different. Those 80 to 100 years that it was being used as fuel for a furnace means nothing in the grand scheme of how rich the land is there. And French Creek State Park exists today it's actually in both Chester County and Berks County, Pennsylvania, but it also was what white people call Lenape land. So likely the tribes there, of course, we don't know specifically the tribes because none of that was kept record, and many of them did not survive the Trail of Tears. Today, the Native Americans that we think of as Lenape, so that's the Susquehanna tribes. It is the Delaware Native Americans. They are all out in North America, in Canada, I believe Saskatchewan. So they are extremely displaced from where they originally lived. But we do know that the Susquehanna River, a river I talk about all the time, which flows into Hopewell Lake through a series of creeks that you'll see in the clips. If you watch my podcast on Seeking Numina, my YouTube channel, you'll see the clips of these places that I'm going to share about. So we've got Mother Susquehanna's energy there. In my book, Sacred Wild, An Invitation to Connect with Spirits of the Land, releasing November 8th, 2025, I share a lot about the sacredness of Susquehanna. And my trip to French Creek ended up being a deeper exploration and foundation building of that connection, that understanding of Mama Susquehanna. And it's really special to be able to share that with you here in this exclusive episode. I've shared a lot of little details and tidbits on the Magic Kitchen podcast, on my Patreon, but this is where I'm going to go into the details and share with you the nitty-gritty of my descent. So I say descent because I was called there by Inanna, my patron goddess, and a lot of people are confused that I work with Inanna when I work with the land and nature so directly. And what I'd like to share about that is that she was a fertility goddess at her core. She was who crops were offered to. She was who you called upon if your crops were blighted, because as a goddess of love and war, she's also going to be a goddess of protection. War is a form of protection, albeit not our favorite one. And she also reigns in the domains of other forms of protection. So she is a protector. She is about abundance, and she brings it for us when we work with her. And so that is a deep connection to the land. And I, at the time, was preparing to launch the Red Thread, a course that, unbeknownst to me, I had been working on for probably about 10 years as a priestess of Inanna. And in the past 6 to 8 months, it started to come clear that it was going to be a course. And as I put that together, Inanna called me. She said, "You need to descend like I did. You need to go out to the woods and spend 3 days and 3 nights and connect." And so I did. I wasn't sure when I would get to. I started looking in October, and it wouldn't be until early January that I got that chance. And it was transformative. I had a cabin to myself. It was a beautiful cabin. I really, really loved it. I'm already planning to go back. And it was in the woods, and behind, actually throughout the woods, but specifically behind the cabin, were big, beautiful stones, gorgeous boulders, likely moved there by the last glaciers. And I was fortunate that directly behind the house, so like right behind, actually the bathroom window looked out to it, was a stone, a nice flat top stone that was just calling me to make it an altar. So something I want to share as well is how to connect to places as sacred places, even if they're not on the list as such, because you can look up French Creek State Park and you can read all about it, and there's nothing in there that says it was sacred. But all land is sacred. All trees are sacred. And so spending time in a forest, you're going to connect with some beautiful land spirits with a lot to share. I saw this rock, and I knew I needed to make an altar out there. I also knew I would be spending a lot of time indoors, and at night I wouldn't want to leave certain elements outside, magical tools, things like that. I brought my drum to commune with, and I brought lots of candles. I actually brought a whole box of candles just in case. Lots of different colors just in case, so I could be spontaneous in the moment and drop into any ritual I needed to. And I also brought holly, dried holly from my Yuletide decor. So I collected all of that up because it's early January, collected all of it up and took it out with me. And I actually made a sacred circle with it on the ground. And it was really special because I didn't realize this until I was laying that sacred circle, that when I was going through my initiation in my coven in the eclectic fairy tradition, we did a connecting exercise to the spirits of the land of our covenstead. And our high priestess collected leaves or flowers from all different plants that are surviving in at this time of year, which was Samhain. Oh, you know what? It might have been Yule, even more connected, actually. I think it was Yule. And the one I got was the holly. And holly is significant in traditional modern witchcraft because of the battle between the Oak King and the Holly King. And in the winter, they battle and the Holly King wins. And so he shines bright throughout the winter. And then in the spring and the summer, the Oak King wins the battle. And oak, of course, gets gorgeous leaves and beautiful acorns fall from it all throughout the spring and summer. So it reflects these changing seasons. It's a really fun myth that we work with in the Wheel of the Year. And holly was the plant for me. So it's very wintry. It's very connected to the season. And it was also charged really by all of the holiday celebrations that we did. Because I had this holly in particular out with some candles right near our dining area. So where we spend most of our time, where we spend a lot of the holiday season. So this formed a sacred protective circle on this first outdoor altar. And because it's biodegradable and certainly very safe, I was able to leave it there as well as an offering to the land. Inside the house, I made an altar with 3 candles, 2 red candles, because I'm there to commune with goddesses of the red thread, Inanna, Freya, Hecate, uh, Kivele, Kiveli, Demeter, Persephone, Kali, Durga, the Morgan, the Kalyach. So it was a lot of that energy. And then I also had a black candle from my high priestess, actually, from our Samhain ritual. It was, no, not our Samhain ritual, from our Hecate's feast day ritual in November 16th. So I had this sacred candle. I had some sacred mugwort from her garden, and I had Dittany of Crete from Crete, from Greece, that I had brought with me last time I visited, when I first visited here. And it was really special because I brought a lot of this Dittany. I still have quite a bit left. So I was able to create a sacred space indoors with that. I was able to burn it as incense. I was even able to roll the candles in it, lightly melt the wax, and roll them in this Dittany of Crete, and then burn them to have that as an incense almost. Like it's a 2-for-1. And I spent the 3 days writing, drumming, popping into trance, writing, little bit of reading, perhaps a snack, and then reading and writing and writing and trancing and drumming and trancing and reading and writing. And that was it. That was all I did. And hiked. I also hiked through the woods a little bit. Now, I'm not a very daring hiker on my own because I get lost really easily. It's actually a very safe area over there. I would not have had that fear, but I definitely am concerned about getting lost on like a 9-mile hike. So I think it was only like a 2.5-mile hike around the lake and into the woods. So that felt more more safe for my disability with getting lost, and with my inability to find myself on paths. And although maybe that would have been a good exercise to let myself get lost and then be found, but I also didn't have any cell signal out there. So these are the times where we have to choose to be practical rather than necessarily as spiritual as we might want to be. And it was really beautiful to connect so clearly, so openly, and to be on my own. It gave me the permission I thought I needed to take my time to connect with the tree that calls me over on my walks, on my communion outside. It gave me the time to drum as loudly and silly and, improv, as much improv as I wanted. And it also gave me the space to truly listen. So often in our witchcraft journey, and I say this as somebody with 3 podcasts, we find ourselves talking more than we find ourselves listening. And I never want to be the kind of priestess that doesn't know how to drop into deep listening. And if you feel like you're not sure what that feels like, the difference between deep active listening and regular listening, maybe you're not active listening as much as you think you are. Some tips that you're not active listening are if you're thinking about what you're going to say next rather than hearing what that person says. Of course, other cues to non-active listening are going to be distractions like cell phones, be doing something else while you're listening. And that's not to say I don't love listening to a podcast while I cook, or I think that's a bit different. That can be quite meditative and connecting. But if we're making a Facebook post while we're listening to our friend talk about this problem they're having, we're probably not hearing them fully. And in our world, multitasking is so valued. Being productive is so valued that we don't often get the time or the space we need to do each individual task. And so we honestly, it's no fault of yours. Don't feel any shame or embarrassment about it if you feel like you're not an active listener. You're conditioned not to be. But we have to be cognizant of it so that we can start reprogramming ourselves to listen. And it is in the witch's pyramid, 4 tenets of witchcraft that work together to allow us to create magic. There's 4 tenets: to know, to will, to dare, and to keep silent. And to keep silent has a couple meanings. It means to not share the intimate details that, goddess or your high priestess tell you is a just you experience. We love sharing everything. And in safe spaces, within your coven, within a container, within a sisterhood, within a group, you can have that experience. You can share. Of course, when you're called to share, we're called to share. But other times we might find ourselves feeling like we have to share, or maybe there's a weird pressure to share because of social media. To keep silent reminds us that we have every right to keep it to ourselves if we want. The other thing, most important, enduring lesson that I think To Keep Silent truly speaks to is that when we listen actively, deeply, with that intention of communion behind the listening, what we're able to hear is so much more powerful than we could ever know until we've heard it. And that's what land spirits work does for us. It gives us the chance to listen, and they have so much wisdom for us when we can get quiet enough, when we can be on their level in some fleeting moment to hear their wisdom. And so that's what I did. And I was fortunate over the 3.5 days. I spent, like I said, most of it in ritual and trance. I brought very easy to make food. I had a kitchenette, which was amazing in this cabin. It was a state park, but it was equipped. I highly recommend going there. We are also uh, in this communion. I also got clarity on my next book, which is really, really exciting. It'll be my third book, and yeah, I think the only thing I could share at this point is that it's going to build on the practices in Sacred Wild, but it's going to bring in more, I guess you could call them advanced practices, more practices that ask you to dive deeper, dig a little bit more into, yeah, the depth of land. Because when you listen, they just tell you. The land spirits just tell you what you want to hear. And not in a way of like they tell you what you want to hear, but they tell you what you're hoping to hear. That understanding. You can hear them. You can hear them. What I also wanted to share is when we're out in the land and we're alone and it's quiet, you might hear things you don't necessarily want to hear. That can be where the voices of negative self-talk might come back in. It might be where you talk yourself into being scared. I had a couple of those moments. I had one moment on the first night where I realized how dark it was. And I closed all the curtains because it freaked me out knowing that with my lights on, people could see me in moving around if they wanted to, which is silly because literally none of these cabins were rented. I went during the week, so none of them were rented. It was also like 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Like I had it to myself, but still close these curtains. Going to the bathroom and having the fan on in there scared me too. I was like, oh, what if I can't hear something else I need to hear because this fan was on? And I kept getting that way. I have an electric toothbrush and I kept thinking, oh, if this toothbrush is on and then somebody sneaks in, I won't hear them sneak in. Like so many intrusive thoughts, so many. And it became an opportunity for me to use the tools that are at my disposal because I'm fortunate in my life. I don't find myself building to panic often. I feel lucky in that way. And when panic does start to rise in situations like that, it's a real test of what I think I know because I have to say, okay, I'm going to tap into my intuition and actually check if there's any reason for me to be upset. I'm going to do some shadow work here and see why I'm feeling a disconnect and an uneasiness about this quiet and this loneliness. And it also, I brought some sage actually also from Greece. So I was able to burn that and go around and just literally sage the room, clear the cabin out. I also was able to better combat those more negative fear-based feelings of what if this, what if that, and bring myself out of it in that way. And then the same thing happened the night I was going to leave. What's interesting, and that same night, I did the similar sort of tools. And what's interesting is the night in between, the second night I was there, was the one I didn't get scared. And yet that was the night something a bit unsettling did happen. So at this point, I'm going to talk about the second night here. So at this point, I've done 2 days at French Creek. And on the second night was the full moon in Gemini. And I go outside to moonbathe. This view was incredible because we have the woods and it's dotted with snow. And the pathways have snow pushed up against the sides of them, and they just look like LED strips. They're so bright. They're this crystalline blue in the sky from the radiant moon in the sky. And as I watched this snow glowing and I drew the moon down, just as my ancestors in Thessaly have done for millennia in ancient times, we draw down the moon in modern witchcraft today. And as I drew her down and I felt her with me, I got so emotional. I had this powerful release, a couple of tears coming out. And I got to say to her, I felt so in communion with her, like a true, like she had come down to earth and was standing next to me and we were beholding this glowing snow together. That's what it felt like. And I asked her, or I said to her, I never feel alone when I'm with you. And it was the most beautiful moment of being held. And then I thought, well, should I go for a moonlit walk? Staying close to the cabin, but should I go for this moonlit walk? And so I stepped a little further towards the path that the cabin is off of. And the land spirit, this was the unsettling part. The land spirits were like, no, you cannot do that. And it, and I asked them why. And the feeling I got was, this isn't your land at night. And that really freaked me out because it made me think, okay, whose land is this? And I turned back to the moon, like you turn back to your friend, like Scooby and Shaggy, I turned back to the moon and I was like, did you hear that? Is that true? And she's just like, yeah, I'll stay with you though. And so the second night, and I noticed it the first night that like as soon as sunset was fully complete, it felt like a shift, but I thought it was me being spooked. Then the third night I felt it again and I was like, okay, this is what they mean. So I found that very, very interesting. And if anybody has any insight, please comment below or email me, elise@seekingnumina.com. I would love to know if there is maybe there's something with the Native Americans and they had some sort of pact with these spirits to allow them to do what they needed to do during the day if the spirits could have the forest at night. I really don't know. That was my first instinct, but I don't know if that was my intuition or just an idea. Sometimes it's hard to say. But that was super unsettling. But that third night, it felt like because the moon and I had connected so well, it felt like she was able to protect me that third night. So that third night, I actually opened every shutter, it was winter, so I didn't open like the sash, but every curtain. And I had the moon with me in my bed. It was almost sensual, but not in a sexual way by any means. It was the innocence of a sleepover when you're a little girl. It was so connecting, so embodying, and I slept wonderfully until exactly 5:09 a.m. I woke up as if it was the exact time I was supposed to wake up, and the moon was still out. It was still dark. It was still night for all intents and purposes. I got one more moon bath in. Well, actually, almost one more. This is second to last moon bath. And then I went inside, took an actual bath, packed up the cabin because that's it. Last night, checkout was 10 a.m. But if here at 5 a.m., I said, you know what? I feel like it's time to go home. I went back outside with all my stuff, loaded the car, and then as I, locked the door and prepared to leave, I did one more drawdown of the moon. Spoke with her a little more, held her in my heart, thanked her for her wisdom. And at that moment, it hit me that Inanna is the daughter of the moon. And what are priestesses if not the daughters of the moon? And I felt a deep lineage of connection at that moment. I felt the red thread. I knew that that was what the moon had for us. It was this connection, this birthright connection to her. If only we choose to accept it, whether we are on the priestess path, or the priest's path. I think it's for all genders to have that deep, deep connection to the moon. And as I drove home that morning, I was going meandering all the way back, a good 30 minutes. And yet, the moon was ahead of me the entire way. I don't even know how that's possible. Just thinking of the route I took and the movement I was making, and, it was not like all in one straight shot, but she was with me the whole way. And it felt like she walked me to my door after a wonderful weekend together. And it was very powerful. And some of the offerings I left the land were the holly, Dittany of Crete. I also left offerings of ash after burned remnants, after burned incense, and incense. I lit a lot of incense and offered that. It was special. It was so special to commune alone in the woods. And I think if you get that call and you're nervous, just remember that you're actually not alone. The moon is with you. The land is with you. And not all land has this contract that you can't explore it in the dark. And it was also special because these land spirits didn't connect with me in a personal way, really. They were welcoming, they were kind, they were courteous. And I asked them, I said, Are we building a bond? Is this a place where I'm meant to return again and again and again? And they were like, Yeah, but I mean, yeah. Like, it was like a very like, yeah, sure. Like, it wasn't like a besties feeling, which I've had at some other sacred sites. I need to do an episode on Malta's hypogeum. That is the most sacred place I've ever been. That's a very different feeling. And it was a good confirmation that there is if every land welcomed me equally amazingly, I would think maybe it's all in my head. But it was kind of nice to be like neutrally welcomed. So thank you for seeking Numina with me today. I hope you enjoyed learning a bit about French Creek and what it was like to spend 3 days and 3 nights there on my own. Please like and subscribe. I post these videos every 2 weeks, and this podcast is also available as an audio. If you're listening to this podcast, hop over to YouTube and watch episodes if you'd like to see pictures and videos of the sacred sites I take you to. Thank you for seeking Numina with me. Bright blessings. Thank you for seeking Numina with me today. Join me at patreon.com/EliseWells to support this show and get access to a library of rituals, exclusive videos, meditations, and more. To learn more about my upcoming retreats, book a tarot reading, or learn with me in workshops, classes, or mentorship, visit seekingnumina.com.